straw, old hay, corn fodder, corn cobs, whatever, but carbonaceous material. We lay that in incrementally after we lay down some corn, and the corn will ferment, of course, to pay the pig's salary when they aerate it and compost it. But we lay that in and just keep building and adding additional inches of material to the manure and the urine that the cattle are dropping. That keeps them extremely dry, clean, warm, and makes a wonderful deep anaerobic bedding pack to protect all these wonderful nutrients for further composting. The whole hay feeding system that we use in our hay shed operates based on this vertically portable feeder. We call it a feeder gate. You can call it whatever you want to. Feed rack, feed gate, hay gate. Everybody has a different name for it. But it's something that Dad came up with years ago as a way to feed hay very efficiently in the wintertime. What we've got is basically a top plate and a bottom plate. These are poles here. It can be pipe. It could be a 4x4, whatever. But anyway, you've got a top and a bottom. And then you've got V slots coming down so they can put their heads in and eat through the top of the V. Now, it is cantilevered. See, it's not straight up and down. It's cantilevered. That way, they can't back up far enough to poop over into the hay. What we're after here, it accomplishes many things. One of the things that it accomplishes is that the cattle don't have access to their hay, so they can't manure and soil that hay and re-ingest parasites. Secondly, it's by having to put their heads in up high and bring them down here to eat, it keeps the cattle from going in, backing out, going in, backing out, so it reduces hay wastage that occurs in so many feeding systems. Of course, the most wasteful is out in the field where they just tromp through it. And then the next thing that it does, so it's hygienic, it's waste-free, and the next thing is that we can raise and lower this. You see the arm up here, and then there's another angle iron on the back of these posts with notches in it, and so the bottom, see the chain here, the bottom actually hangs on this notched piece. So we can actually raise and lower the entire gate. We can raise it and lower it 4 feet to accommodate the bedding buildup. And then to feed the hay, everything is very simple. We just drop the hay right into the gate. The cattle come in and eat, and there's a slot here for every single animal, so every single animal has a spot to eat. The being able to move it up and down allows us to let this bedding build up. And of course, the bedding, the whole idea here is to get these animals inside during the dormant season when the soil, which is not alive and it's sleeping because of winter, when that soil cannot metabolize the nutrients those cattle are dropping. Those cattle are dropping 50 pounds of material out their back end every day. And that material is highly unstable. If it gets dry, it wants to vaporize off in the air, and we all know what that smells like. And if it gets wet, it wants to leach into the groundwater, and we all know what that does to our groundwater streams and bays. And so a proper farm, a farm that's environmentally friendly and socially responsible, a moral, ethical farm, will A, it'll never smell, B, it will not lose any nutrients into the groundwater and on the runoff. And so during that dormant season, what we want to do is try to protect as much of that manure as possible just under these awnings, and the feeder gates allow us to feed very efficiently in that kind of approach. We have these 80-some calves in this in the barn in the facility, and we confine their water. We buy a lot of calves at the stockyard. Well, our receiving program for these calves from the stockyard is we control their water. So I'll just start this. This is a water system that just comes from a well at the house, and it's a 300-gallon tank, so it'll take them half a day. And then what we do is we worm with Shaklee Basic H soap. No reason to put them in the head gate. Put a little bit of soap in the water, and that it'll actually suds right up. You can actually it'll look like dishwater. But that soap will help them to get rid of their parasites. And then we use Willard's water, which is a catalyst altered water. We put a little bit of that in, and that reduces their toxins. In other words, the average person who buys a calf from the sale barn is going to put a bunch of vaccinations, medications, and things into that animal to keep it alive because of the stress of the sale barn and the stockyard. And so we do these preventive measures, biological preventive measures, to strengthen the immune system and help the animal to thrive without all the medications and the shots. We give the calves mineral in order to, again, increase their immune system, and this mineral is our own formulation, our own combination of things. It starts with NutriBalancer, which is primarily food-grade soft rock phosphate, and then kelp meal is in there as well, seaweed, and then to get them started on it real well, we add some molasses to make it sweet so they'll start, and then we gradually back that off. We don't put any salt in it during the winter because they get salt in their hay. We use salt as a preservative on the hay. But in the summertime, we mix the salt, the kelp, and the NutriBalancer together in order to have a ration that keeps their immune system real high and up and running. The immune system really functions with the minerals, the carbon, and the feed itself. So we have all those different components taken care of in the water and in the mineral box. When we talk about farm buildings, we want to think several things. One is function over form, and the second one is multiple use. And so when we look at this hay shed, what we call the hay shed, it actually has many uses. It's strictly a pole construction, and even for the rafters, we're using just oak poles out of the woodlot, and of course that increases the value of the poles because we're basically using firewood for a rafter. And then if you'll notice the skylights, we have a lot of skylights in here, and those skylights are essential for maintaining sanitation because it's the ultraviolet light that kills the pathogens in the bedding. So we want a tremendous amount of light. We want structure just that's as functional as can be. I realize, it's cheap, but it's functional. The cows don't care if they have pole rafters. And then multi-purpose. We have pigs. We have cows in here now. We can have pigs in there. Of course, we have sawdust piled, wood chips, straw, hay. And during the summertime, we put poultry panels in here and raise chickens in here. When the pigs come out, we hang rabbit cages over those. And so the whole structure serves multiple species of animals at different times of the year, multiple use. When the cows go out then in the spring, back out to grazing on grass, then we come in to that bedded area with the pigs. And the pigs, of course, are going after this fermented grain, which is down in the bedding pack. Now, as they till this, that grain, of course, producing their salary, as they till this, they're aerating it. And as they aerate it, it injects the oxygen for the decomposition. See, just a couple of weeks ago, this was cow manure and urine. There's wood chips, straw, old hay, and that carbon and unstable nutrients are now decomposing aerobically, and the pigs are doing all the work, and they actually enjoy it. We're actually allowing the pigs to use the plow on the end of their nose to allow them to fully express their physiological distinctiveness. The reason farmers don't like to do large-scale composting is because of the materials handling and all of the tractors and equipment and petroleum to do the work. But if we let animals do the work, suddenly we don't need to generate all the cash to replace the oil and the fuel and the parts and the machinery. In other words, as soon as we let animals do the work, the profit potential on the farm becomes size neutral, because we do not have to generate the cash to replace the things that rot, rust, and depreciate. So it completely changes the economics of the farm and allows us to fully capitalize on the nutrients that we have. We want to capture every nutrient that we have on the farm. So this actually gets very warm and completely changes. There's already no smell in the material as it aerobically composts. Then when we spread it back out on the fields, if it's a sunny day, there's no odor because there's no vaporization of the nutrients, because the nutrients are now tied up in the bodies of the microbes that did the decomposition. So it stabilizes those nutrients. If we spread on a rainy day, the nutrients don't leach into the groundwater. So they all stay right on the farm and right here where we can recycle them and capture them back into the soil. The pigs are going after the fermented grain, which is down in the bedding. The bedding has actually ensiled because it's anaerobic since the cows tromped out the oxygen. But you've got wood chips here, you've got old hay, some straw, but see, you can see the corn that's down in this fermented bedding, and that corn actually gets so, look at that. See, I can actually squeeze the juice out of that and break that. It's just like rubber. There it is. It'll just break right open like rubber, and that actually releases the sugars. See, that's real malleable. I can just break that open. It's not hard corn anymore. It's real sugary as that corn has fermented, and that's the paycheck. That's the salary that those pigs get for doing their work. When we talk about forestry, which is a pretty big part of Polyface Farm since we have 450 acres of woodlands, we talk about upland deciduous hardwoods. Upland deciduous hardwoods come back on their own volition after a cut. And so what we have found to be the most effective is to go in and identify a spot that ought to be harvested and harvest it completely. The industry term for this, of course, is a clear cut. But when we talk about clear cut, we're talking about maybe 1 acre or at the most 2 acres. Very, very small, complete openings to allow everything equal access. What this does is it allows the brambles and the young saplings to have full sunlight and come back. The single biggest determinant of the growth of which species on the ground is the amount of light penetration in the forestal canopy. That's what regulates germination, species, all of those kind of things. Brambles and early species, pioneer species, require 100% sunlight. So generally, this has been cut now for 3 years. This is 3rd year growth. And what you see are brambles and weeds. It's already gone through its weed stage, and so by next year, the weeds essentially will be gone, the brambles will be gone, and we'll see more and more of these locusts, little oak trees, which are under the locusts, and the red maples and the early species. A forest has a succession. It's always moving from one successional phase to another successional phase. And as a result of that species complexion, as it changes over time, that is why we want to open up these areas and allow the full light penetration and allow the full successional speciation to occur. That gives us the greatest amount of diversity and the greatest productivity in terms of allowing all the different species to go through their cycle and express themselves. When we talk about wildlife browse and the impact that the opening has on the wildlife, we can look at these new little 3-year-old, this is an oak sapling, and you can see the terminal buds here have been browsed off. You can see one right here, and we can actually tell the impact of the wildlife and whether the wildlife has enough to eat or not by how far down the twigs they graze. If they just nip off these tips, we know that they're getting plenty to eat. Now, here's a tip that's a natural tip, you notice, that hasn't been grazed off at all. This little tree here has been completely freed from the browsing. Now, we don't know which one of these little saplings is going to end up, whether it'll be this chestnut oak or this red oak or some other oak that comes up in here. We don't know which of these oaks will end up being the dominant stand, the dominant tree 60 years from now. But right now, all we want is as many of them to sprout as possible to allow all the genetic diversity to play itself out in this new forest that's sprouting up from the forest floor. These locust trees, of course, which are overtopping these little saplings right now, the locust trees require a lot more sunlight, and they are very short-lived. We call them pioneer species, and they only live for about 30 to 60 years. So this locust then provides shade so that these oak trees will grow tall and straight. Otherwise, they'll be what we call wolf trees, where they grow real spread out and not as good for making lumber. And so the locust tree actually acts as a nurse tree to protect these oaks from too much sunlight and allow the oaks to grow in a more shaded area. The oak trees only need about 30% sunlight to grow very well. The locust tree needs about 100% sunlight. So again, light is the determining factor for what grows and what gets a chance to really express its physiological distinctiveness to the greatest degree. Since we've reforested everything that should have never been uncovered in the first place, now we're beginning to deforest or reopen some areas that are very conducive to small pastures, open land, and things like that. Again, to create a tremendous amount of edge effect and diversity within the landscape, so that there's open forest riparian, open forest riparian, and it moves with the topography on the berm lines, these key lines. So we're opening this up now, this entire area, as a new pig pasture. You notice we're leaving some saplings for shade for the pigs. These will continue to grow up. We're leaving any kind of nut-producing trees like persimmons or walnuts or mulberries or anything like that. And of course, the first thing that'll come up are these little blueberry plants. The pigs, of course, will enjoy eating the blueberries for a couple of years as this gradually makes its transition over to perennial forages, as we've seen in the other pig pastures. Now, the way this works to describe the landscape is this is a ridge top behind us, and if we move over here, we will see the edge of a ravine. And this will be the edge of the field right here. We let the topography define where the edge of the field is going to be. We don't believe in square fields. We want a lot of ins and outs and following the terrain. And so that berm line is going to define where the edge of the field is. So we're continuing to cut. We're continuing to cut the wood down into the ravine because those trees are mature, they're not growing, a lot of them are diseased, they're crooked. We need to start over. And so we'll cut down into the ravine a little clear cut, but that will be fenced out and it will go through the natural forestal revegetation, early succession, brambles, berries, bear and deer and turkey food, and gradually turn back into hardwoods on the side of this field. So we have a kidney bean shaped field with a newly cut ravine in the middle, coming back with early successional forest with a kind of open land pig pasture savanna around it, letting the terrain define what's open and what's forested, creating more diversity, more edge effect, more multiple use and beauty in the landscape. We're going to take this tree down next, and it's not really big enough for a saw log. It's close, but not quite big enough for a saw log. Pretty much anything we can make a good 8-inch by 8-inch cant out of, we take for a saw log. We're going to bring it my way, so we're going to hinge it on this side and then cut it in the back. One of the critical elements here that I want to show is that we can cut the stump fairly high, but then we want to cut the stump right down and actually shave it right down to the ground. That way, when sprouts come up from this tree and regrowth comes up from this tree, they're actually coming up from the root crown and there's not a distance of cambium. This part of the tree will die, but the roots, which are down in the ground, essentially will never die. And so what we end up with then is a stump that's right down flush to the ground. And of course, I realize that taking that extra care to cut down low is a little bit tedious, cutting this extra amount off. But when you're done, you really have a beautiful stump. When you look across the landscape, the stumps are essentially not noticeable, and you can just drive over them, and it makes a beautiful thing. And then these sprouts will come right up from the edges here and directly up from the root crown, so there's no cambium that will eventually, when the sprout gets yay big, that can break off. It'll be a nice healthy new stump growth utilizing the old root crown that was in the tree. So one of the points of working in the woodlot is we may not go as fast as some people, but what we want is an aesthetically pleasing landscape when we're done. That's why we stack branches. The branch piles act as a wildlife haven and a place for rabbits and moles and voles and bugs and things to live on. Takes a little extra time, but it creates a wonderfully more bountiful forestal area, and a more aesthetically pleasing area too, and more productive because the regrowth is going to be coming right off of the old root crowns. Now, from a stewardship standpoint, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that if we multi-generationally for, let's just say, 200, 300, 400 years, harvest the best and leave the poorest, that we're going to end up with only the poorest in our woods. And so we are products of that, and our forest land is like that. So how do we determine what to do with a particular site? That's what I want to talk about for just a moment. And I also want to talk about how to identify healthy trees and sick trees. For example, if we look at this tree right here, one of the telltale signs of a tree that's in decline is an expanded bole. When we see the bole, this is called the bole of the tree, this bottom part. When we see the bole expand and it's swelling, just as if you sprained your ankle and it swells because it's inflamed and hurting, that's the same thing that's going on with this tree. It's inflamed, it's hurting, and it's already setting in rot coming up into the tree. In fact, you can see the other part of the fork. This is a forked tree, and if we move to this fork, you see where the bugs and the birds are already beginning to take their toll on it. Another telltale sign of a tree that's in decline is to look at the top of the tree, at the canopy, and see how many dead branches there are. You see a dead branch right there at about 15 feet, a big one there at about 20 feet, and as you go on up the tree, you see dead branches, and in fact the canopy begins to sag. And when a tree grows healthy, the canopy stays very upright. The branches are at fairly sharp angles as they reach to the light, and they're trying to find that light. As it ages, those branches begin to sag out, and so that instead of having a very upright physique, it begins to sag and the branches become more horizontal coming out of the tree. Trees are living organisms. That means they live, they grow, and they die. And so the best thing is to harvest these trees before they actually go into decline and die and fall over and rot. I mean, the resource is here to utilize. There's no sense in losing the resource. We might as well go ahead and use it. Now, trees are measured by diameter at breast height. And that's, of course, here's your chest. And so normally when you're measuring trees, you're measuring them diameter at breast height. That's how foresters, it's called DBH. And the amount of area that the tree occupies is called basal area. Now when we're culling trees, the rule of thumb is that if you can't sit between the fork, either take them both or neither. Because if you take this one, rot will set into this one. If I take this one off, rot will set into this one. So what we want to do is either take them both or neither one if there's not a lot of distance between the two forks. Now, if we go to one that does work, we'll come right up here to this one. Now when we come to this tree, we notice that it has, of course, resprouted just like you would normally see a tree sprout, or maybe it was a brand new tree after this was cut. There are certainly stumps here that have been cut. This was probably cut over in the 1940s, about 60 years ago, and high graded. And they left all the junk trees and took the very best. But this tree came up, and you notice how this fork, which at one time was much bigger than this one, is actually the one that has died here in the natural kind of self-pruning process. Now, this fork here and this one are closely related and do not fit that rule of being able to sit down between them. So I'd want to take both of these off. However, on the other side, right here, the other